Gene, thanks so much for taking some time to hang with me today. I really appreciate it. It's great to be with you.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, you have experienced so many things over the course of your career. I love how, we get to a certain age and we've got all these winding paths, right? Of trying all these different things. And the thread, though, that I see in talking with you that's interwoven through everything that you have done is creativity. So that's kind of a big concept. What does that word mean to you?
It's fascinating. I'm very grateful for my entire career, this creative journey I've been on and continue to be on. I looked up creativity actually a few weeks ago. In the dictionary, it really has to do with the imagination and bringing something forward that hasn't been created before. Just by the near. Your creativity can be a noun, a verb, a adjective. A bunch of different things. So I think that in and of itself makes it incredibly powerful. And weaving that throughout my life and throughout um, my career, it really has been. It's like a joy, and sometimes I'm amazed at the things I've gotten to do, and other times I'm not that amazed because it does take some. I have the scars to show it, and I have the history of getting down there in the dirt, in the mud, and failing, and then getting back up again and going at it again. And so that it's that common thread. I take a lot of pride in, but I'm also really humbled by it because creativity is, whereas it's like one of our great human traits, it also doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with the support and help of others, the collaboration of people, and and the people that are authentically rooting for you. And sometimes it takes some people that aren't rooting for you, and being willing to listen to them as well. And so yeah, it's a beautiful blessing, and at the same time it's also a very humbling thing to be a part of, when or to just be spoken about, or when they think of you, they think of creativity.
Yeah. Take us on a short journey of how creativity has emerged throughout your life. Like, did your parents cultivate that creativity in you as a child, or were they focused on other things?
It's interesting. I'm the youngest of five. I'm third generation Mesoamerican. And I also come from a generation where we didn't really learn Spanish as our primary or as even our secondary language because a lot of it was thought of, we don't want the accent in order to get, have a better shot at life and whatnot. And I appreciate that. And there's sometimes I wish I did speak, was fluent. But as the youngest of five, I had two older brothers who were stud jocks, and so I was usually, the kind of like not so much the odd man out, but wasn't the first picked on the basketball team. And so I got to spend a lot of time with my mom, and she is incredibly crafty and creative. And my grandfather too was also, crafty and creative, and he was a very self-made person, and um, if he didn't have it, he would make it. And my mom was very much the same way. There was always some type of craft going on in the corner of our room. We had a big house and, 10,000 things going on at the same time. But there's always this little corner that she carved out that was either painting something or creating something or making something. It wasn't that we couldn't afford it. It just became a lot more fun to make it, and to create it yourself. And then, there became this appreciation of it. And so that's really kind of where it instigated. And then there was just little moments growing up as a kid, you know, um, being told not to draw in second grade, and saying that's not okay. And then by fourth grade, having one of your fellow classmates saying, no, no, you need to draw. You need to, you're good at this. You need to, you need to keep doing it. And so there's little things like that along the way that, kind of helped me carve out my own little niche aside from sports, aside from, what my brothers, and family were up to. And it was great because a lot of them, my mother was very great and loved art and wanted to, me to have a really creative life. And at the same time, they knew well enough to kind of step back at a certain point and go, okay, go do what you're going to do. And having that kind of freedom to go make it up as you went along, because we had no age. I was the first one to go away to college in my family. I was the youngest, but I went away. I was the first one to graduate, and having that kind of family support, not knowing what's coming next, but me out there making it up as I went along, really kind of set me on a path of, okay, make it up. Create it yourself. If you want it, you got to go, make it up and figure out how to make it happen. And that's kind of like been my journey from that point.
Mhm. So many people that are driven by creativity and exploring the arts as a young person don't actually pursue the educational component. It's more of like, oh, I can, explore this on my own, which you can, but you did choose the educational path as well, getting your bachelor's in fine arts, University of Redlands, and then your master's. Why did you choose to go that educational route as opposed to, just exploring these things on your own?
Interestingly enough, when I went to college, I thought I was under the assumption, as a lot of kids in go to college for, that at the end there would be a job waiting for me. It's like, oh, these are what the good jobs are. And so I thought, well, I want to get one of those good jobs. And however, going into a creative field, like fine art and whatnot, there isn't that. And to live a creative life, you're self-employed, or you're doing it on your own. Otherwise you're doing freelance and working for somebody else. And you know, so in going to higher education, for me, I figured out by the time I became was a senior in college, and I really realized college really is about becoming a professional learner, somebody that and so at the end they give you a receipt, and then you can go out and show that receipt to somebody, and an employer is going to go, that person can learn, I can teach that person. And there's the jobs, there's the positions, there's the opportunities. But it isn't about learning a trade, which is very different than going to college. So college has this other whole dynamic of social, and you're trying things out, you're getting hurt, you're getting you're having successes and wins and everything, but it's all in a very enclosed environment. And that kind of prepared me for how to navigate the professional world, in being able to talk to people, being able to relate to people, being able to learn something and ingest it, and then becoming a professional at it. And that's what I think college is for. So, and some kids, I can tell you a number of people from my high school that were ready. They didn't have to go to college. These kids were ready to go do that, and they're ready to step into a professional field, and that's great. I don't think I had that, and it took me a while. Even coming out of college, to kind of learn how to navigate a professional world, and at the same time navigate something that's going to generate what I had in mind, when the art, the creativity, as a professional, as a somebody who's respected, and somebody who is seen as, hey, you want something creative done and you want results and whatnot. And I would hope it be in that conversation, and knowing that along the way, it's not going to be success, a line of successes and zero failures. It's like, two steps forward, three steps learning, and so there's a lot of um, and that's what I think college gives us too. Again, it's a closed environment. So in those failures, you can just go up and you get up and go and dust yourself off, go to class the next day. In life, a lot of people go, failure, I'm just going to head a different direction, and that's fine. And sometimes it's not running from whatever happened. It's actually going through it, ingesting it, feeling it, learning from it, and using that as fuel for what's coming next.
So many of us that are creative, we want to just spend all of our time creating what we have a vision to create, right? Whatever that is, whether it's fine art, visual art, podcasting, designing fashion, music. And yet there's also this component of you're probably going to have to work for the man too, right? You gotta actually make some money somehow. How did you navigate that in early on in your career of, okay, I want to pursue my own passion versus I got to generate some income?
Well, I was very lucky. Like I said, I first started off in comic books, and we had my brother and I opened our own studio, and then we got picked up by a fashion company, and I became the creative director there. That led me to the .com thing and whatnot. But all along the way, the great thing about creative, and being willing to be creative versus there's a difference, and it's a very fine line, but there's a difference between scarcity and creativity, you know, and creativity should, scarcity has your stomach kind of turns sometimes, a lot of not knowing what's coming next, and you're not sure if it's going to work and whatnot, whereas the other is similar, but for me, creativity is more, should have you more on edge, and I've always kind of leaned into that versus shying away. So um, there's not a direct line to it. There's very much, okay, if I'm going to create what I want to create and no one's created it before, there should be some, I don't know if there should be, but if it was that easy, I'm quite certain somebody would have done it before. So that it's the unknowing and then leaning into that, that is, I think, the key that most people kind of shy away from, leaning into the unknown, leaning into a very uh not knowingness of what comes next. Who knows, but the definition of creativity is, imagination that hasn't come to fruition yet. So the unknown is really scary to most people.
Mhm. Speaking of unknown, you said and just kind of glossed over, oh, yeah, my brother and I started our own comic book studio. Like, where I assume you're saying where you designed comic books, not just sold them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at that time it was 92, 93, and comic books were just starting to dabble in the digital age. Some companies had started hacking the same computer program that was coloring the Sunday funnies, and that had a whopping 16 colors available to it. So they started, they went in and hacked the code to that, and now they can get like 256 colors, and that was cool. Um, at the same time, here comes Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop, and I just started coloring in that. And then I, eventually, and at that time we didn't have, there was no internet, there was no, you know, uh, social media or whatnot. So you couldn't go online and just YouTube, how do you do this? It really was make it up, and I actually wrote to Adobe on a couple occasions and got some great favorable letters back and said, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I want to color this line art. And so our studio was actually, built on coloring comic books, and bringing Photoshop into comic books. And we actually did a symposium. I was part of the 1990, 1995 San Diego Comic Con Color Symposium on bringing digital coloring into the comic book world. And now 99.9% of all comic books are colored digitally. Um, but it was one of those, make it up, here's something cool, and it could be a great tool. And I remember sitting in my studio, or, my very first studio, and that, which was actually the edge of my bed, and in my apartment, and trying to figure out, okay, if I can get this color to drop in here, that would be really, really great. But you have pioneers like Steve Oliff, who colored the very first digital comic, Akira #8, um, who was a hero of mine, and I actually got to do that symposium, invited by Steve Oliff, because he was like, I have no idea what this Photoshop is. We're just hacking the local newspapers, version of the Sunday Funnies program. So let's figure this out. And from then on, you have an entire industry was built on that. So, but it didn't exist before. And, sometimes when your imagination just starts running, you just go, okay, let's do this. And we had a very successful studio for several years.
Mhm. I think about two components that you're talking about. One is you're saying, okay, I've got this idea that I want to, color comic books in a digital way, that this is not being done. So there's that on the edge creativity. But then there's also the part, and I don't know all the details, but I'm sitting on the edge of the bed of my apartment, you know, doing this. Like, it's that back to, how do you make your dream work financially? like I'm hearing, okay, you got to pursue the edge of creativity. Like don't stop, keep going after whatever it is you want, have your mind open, pursue that. But the financial component, especially for many of the people that are connected to Awaken Magazine, have this desire of making a difference in the world, right? Whether it's through creative expression, through spirituality, through healing. And there's this tension between what I want to do and I got to pay the bills. How have you navigated that over the course of your life?
I think early on, actually, well into my 30s, money was a big drive for me.
Yeah.
And money, that financial stability, which had me have a lot of success early in my career. I was flying back and forth to New York for my .com position. I was, head of one of the biggest street brands in LA. I was working with people like Eminem and Janet Jackson and all these creatives that is very high profile, and the financial security that came along with that was great.
Mm.
But there was that always, always that nagging thing in the back of my head was, are you happy?
Mm.
And this is when I had to get really in touch with my why. Why was that voice calling me? And two, does this money make me happy? And when I sat down with myself and said, the money is not really important. And it is important. Unfortunately, it is important in our society. Like in the Western civilization, it's like everything's driven by money. That doesn't mean money makes you happy. It
Right.
means money has you survive and have you, live. So, it was a great lesson in, the class I taught at school was, it's like, look, find your why first and then find a way to finance that why. And so, a lot of my graphic design work financed my creative fine art, which is, that's kind of how it works a lot of times. Andy Warhol was a great example of that. Incredible graphic designer. Shepard Fairey currently is a fantastic example and, one of my heroes. But a lot of his design, he's a great graphic designer, and that translates into street art. He uses that to finance, a lot of his stuff that has incredible messaging right now. So having that, my graphic design, when I got paid for, finance my fine art and finance my, what, and I have a fantastic wife who is very loving and very supportive. And I have people around me that are also incredibly supportive that, would come to my shows or do come to my shows. Or I say, hey, I have this thing going on, come on over, and they're there. And those are the people that are gold to me, whether they're family or just people you meet along the way. You have people that become your tribe, and I think that's more important than money, than, because there's times when I said, hey, I need somebody for this, and it has zero financing. And sometimes it has them, they're not going to make anything back from it, but yet they'll invest in me, because I've invested in them, or just because they love me. And I think that's important, connect. And all of a sudden they're part of my why now. I have a group of people, family, friends, and whatnot that are my why. When one of my artist statements as an artist in my fine arts is, the human spirit at play. Well, my human spirit, in my vision, doesn't play with itself. So you have to find playmates. You have to find your little tribe that you play with. And I have, I'm constantly discovering people along my journey that are that. Who is, who's gonna, go play this with me or go play that with me. And, sometimes it's financial, but most of the time it's just really playing. You find somebody to play with. And then being a professional about it and having something, sometimes it's a spouse, sometimes it's a 9 to 5, sometimes it's an online thing or whatever it is, but that supplements, your fine art until your fine art can supplement everything else.
Mhm. I love this idea of, obviously you talked about finding your tribe, but finding somebody to play with. That's such a unique way of, I guess, for me seeing it, because oftentimes it's in the world that we're living in is like, well, I'm looking for somebody to collaborate with in order to grow my brand, in order to grow whatever thing that I'm doing. Where you're saying, oh, what if we just had like this playful like connection that we're playing together? Yeah, that's really fun. It's interesting. I have this friend who we both got into channeling messages um, kind of around the same time. And so she proposed, hey, what if we just got together weekly and channeled messages for each other? And I thought, oh, this is kind of weird. I don't know. And then we started having people join us once a week. So every Wednesday afternoon, we have somebody join us and we channel messages for them to bring them inspiration and hope and wisdom. And it's just play. Like that's what it is. You know what I mean? But in
Right.
a well, it's serious because we have somebody's life that we're, investing in. But like you said, it's just play. Yeah, it's very powerful. So you then went on, and I want to get to your fine art career and sound therapy that you're now stepping into. I really want to explore both those areas. But before we do that, I want to talk just for a moment about you spent, I think, almost 10 years teaching as an adjunct professor at the University of Redlands, where you went for your bachelor's. What was that like going back there, a few years later and investing in students that were your age when you were what was that like? What were some of the things that were key lessons that you wanted them to take away?
It was an honor to be asked back, at the time, and I'm not sure she's still there right now, because they may have had a changeover, but Penny McElroy was my first design teacher. And she invited me back. She called me up and said, hey, you've had this really cool design career going on. Would you be interested in teaching a course? And I said, sure, this is great. And at the time, I was a creative director and design director for Fox Sports, Fuel TV online. And that was, I was really busy with that. But once I got into teaching, it really kind of opened up for me. Now, when I first went to, again, no one in my family had gone to uh, college. Period. I think my older brother and sister went to JCs, and that was great. But nobody had went to a 4 year, and I'd gone away, and here I am, and now I'm starting this, into this fine art program. And Penny McCord, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get there, and they're going to have all these answers for me, and those are going to be the answers I'm going to use to get a great job. And I remember being frustrated for like 4 years at Penny McElroy because she gave me zero answers. She taught me a lot of incredible techniques and technical stuff, but as far as answers to being a designer and artist and whatnot, she just kept asking questions. And I think that's a beautiful trait and a beautiful way of teaching. And another mentor who came in, I think he was my junior year, who was, I believe, is still there as well. And he was still there when I went back to teach, was Raul Arcero, who is one of the world's most fantastic sculptors, and he taught me that ceremony can be part of creativity, and I was in his ceramics and his Raku ceramics class and went up, but he actually brought a sacredness to the whole creative process for me. So when asked to come back, I knew what I wanted to do when, because I had had a lot of great experience in self development and meeting my new wife, and at that point it was, I was ready to share a lot of these great insights and everything. And so going back, it really was like, okay, I got to figure out 9,000 questions to ask, and then of those questions figure out how to ask each of those 5 different ways. And it became a beautiful game. And my students, who I'm still in contact with to this day, some are 10, 12 years out at this point, but I'm watching their kids grow, and I'm, and they're sharing with me their lives and whatnot. But the feeling that you've had an impact by just asking them simple questions, and having those questions become part of their creative process, was a great part of my journey. I do hope I get to, go back someday to a higher education, university or something, because I still feel like there's a lot more teaching left in me. And towards the end, uh, I'd probably say about, the last 4 years, the number one question my kids were asking me was, I want to be a professional designer. I want to be an artist. What do I charge?
Mm.
And it was interesting because, my canned answer became, well, you charge what you're worth. So you got to, figuring out your why, getting connected, getting committed to it, getting, um, and having all that. But, figure out what you're worth. And that's what you charge. And you don't apologize for that. Well, I think my last year of teaching, I kind of actually sat down and did the math, and this goes back to the financial part. I was actually teaching for gas money. You know, Adjunct professors at that time, still don't get paid a ton. Yeah, and there's not a lot of what some would think is a great college professor career at the adjunct level. So I petitioned for a full time position, and the university at the time just didn't wasn't organized enough, and they were going through too many changes to create another position. And I'd done I was on 3 presidential committees, helping the university get their creative online computers set up, online classes. I had taught in the MBA program online, which is one of their first offerings, online education. And then they had an influx of in students. So I was actually an advisor for 40 students plus 3 full-time um, classes teaching, and still working for gas money. So I thought, you know what? I can't say this to my students and not be living it. And that's when I had to leave. They didn't ask me to leave. I left because I didn't want to be hypocritical, be a hypocrite in what I was telling my students and not living that life.
Mhm. So, one of the things that you referenced earlier in our conversation was the influence of your Mesoamerican heritage. And I will tell you that one of the great things about me getting to talk to so many different people and interviewing all sorts of different people of all different backgrounds, I learned something. I'd never even seen the term Mesoamerican before. And so I Googled it and I was like, interesting. So maybe one, you could educate us on that term, those of us who are not, um, educated on it. And then two, how did that heritage, how does it influence your work, both in terms of fine art as well as sound therapy, which I want to hear more about in a second?
Yeah. So Mesoamerican is simply, the a person who is majority from Hispanic or Latin American or Southern Latin American heritage. I am 64% DNA native to the Americas. So my DNA is authentically, everything from um, Patagonian, which is my primary DNA section, to the Andes, to Peru, to Guatemala. And then I have 12% Mayan. I have Aleutian, which is the very north top, Alaskan. And I have North Woods. And then I have Sonoran Desert. So I have all this DNA within me, and it's funny because they say if you go back, I think it's 50 years, it took over 4,400 people for you to be here. That's a lot of ancestors. That's a lot of DNA and primarily energy that generates you. And so to for me to kind of disclaim or to not be a part of that world, it seems like I'm missing out on most of my life. And now I grew up in Southern California. Big family, and all, went to private Catholic schools, 1 through 12, and a lot of big families there. Not a ton of historical ancient culture practices or traditions. I mean, we made our own traditions living in Southern California. Like you can go to the beach on Christmas. It's awesome. But there wasn't a lot of that going on. We had tastes of it, but we didn't have a ton of it. And it wasn't until later in life, like about my mid 30s, that I really started diving into, okay, I'm darker than most of the kids that I look back at my, high school pictures and my grade school pictures. And like, I was a dark kid in the class. And what is that about? And that's when I started diving into what my DNA was. And then through self-development and meditation did I actually meet my great-grandmother, and that opened up an entire different world. My great-grandmother passed away about, I think, 16 years before I was born. But in a meditation, there she was, and she wasn't, um, it wasn't like this, oh thing. It was very much like, hey, we've been waiting for you. Let's go. It was a very, Hispanic grandmother type thing. So, uh, and that meditation, it was sure as I'm sitting there talking to you, is very much that type of encounter. Yeah, and so that woke me up to like I'm supposed to be doing something, and I'm neglecting an entire side of myself. So I dove into it, and um, it's been life changing, life altering, life affirming. That I was supposed to, I'm supposed to be in a creative field. My ancestors are very creative people. Primarily, seeing where my great grandparents came from in 1909, walking from Durango, Mexico to Southern California. That's 2,200 miles on foot. They arrived with the baby in their arms. So that's not, that is something where, you look at that and like, okay, and me being mad that there's so much traffic today, or there's, these things that we kind of consume ourselves with on a day-to-day basis. Their life was different, and if they had to go through that, I can endure, waiting in line, for anything. um Coming through, where they were in Durango, Mexico, which is, the cross-cultural sections of the Nahuatl people, which is, the original people of Mexico. You'll hear a lot of, Hispanics or whatnot talk about the ancient Nahuatl and the Toltecs. Um, Durango is kind of like that apex center where the Nahuatl, the Toltecs, and then the Hoshio people from the south, which are the creative shamans, creativity comes from. That's kind of that cross section, and these two people came from there, and so I'm extremely, humbled by that they would make that journey to have me be in the position I am in today. And along that journey comes a lot of different influences of traditions and whatnot, and it actually opened up my world to ceremony and to the sacred sound ceremonies, and what it means to heal people or to be provide therapy for people through sound. You think a lot of the ceremonies around a campfire from the ancient times a long time ago, most of it had music, shaman drums and flutes and you go to Maori, you have the didgeridoos and all these ancient instruments. And I'm always the kind of guy that goes, why? Well, why did they have that? Why couldn't they just tell stories? Why were they singing? And why did they always have to have music? And it turns out the music actually, the sounds and frequencies of those actually influence and help whatever the ceremony is for. So somebody could be looking for an awakening or healing something and whatnot. So depending on what's going on in the ceremony, depends on what type of music is being played for them. Because and we'll get into the sound science part of it, but um the frequencies that are actually being generated by native instruments actually physically affect our bodies, given that our entire reality is made up of sound frequency. So those instruments are attuned to our natural body sounds, and it's almost like tuning us back to who we originally are at our optimal best when somebody's playing a shaman drum or flute or something like that. So I was excited and on this journey of discovering, kind of connecting the ancient wisdoms of the past with the new technology that institutions like the Mayo Clinic and John Hopkins and all of them are doing studies on to rediscover this ancient wisdom. Why is sound such a prolific thing? Well, it's like 120 years, for the past 120,000 years, sound was the only medicine. We've only had big pharma for the past 80 years, and look where that has taken us. So beyond that, there's only one medicine that the Egyptian used, and they wrote it in their hieroglyphics, and that was sound. And that's it. They had one, they have an instrument they told us how to make, and they said they got that medicine from 6 generations before them, and it's sound. That's it. There was no any other thing that actually generated the healing properties because it's what we are, it's who we are. Our bodies are meant to heal each other, and if we're all frequency sound, we can heal each other, heal ourselves with frequency sound.
So you got introduced to sound therapy then, and obviously there this is connected to this meditation with your grandmother. At what point did you say, "Okay, wow, I really am understanding the power of sound healing, sound therapy, sound baths." Did you say to yourself, "Okay, I want to do that"? Like, that's a big shift from this is amazing to I want to do this now. How did that shift take place for you? And then how have you then cultivated this in your life?
Yeah, it actually is. It was beautiful synchronicity. So I got invited to a sound bath, and I'm like, wow, that felt great. This is so good, And then going to bed a couple hours later, I was like, that was that, and okay, that was done. And then I got invited to another one a few months later, and I had already started doing breath work with my wife, who is a master breath work practitioner. And I noticed in the breathwork session, I'm having these incredible meditations and visualizations and whatnot. And I'm in this sound bath, and I'm like, oh, I feel great again. This is really wonderful. And then waking up the next morning, I was bothered that I wasn't still feeling that way. And then it could be why? Why? How come I can't feel like that, on my own? What's going on there? And so I just started digging in, within 2 to 3 weeks of that is when my grandmother came to me and in a meditation. And I'm like, okay, what do you want? You know, what do you want? I'm buying a flute that I heard someone playing a sound bath in. I'm not sure what you want as I'm holding my flute, my new flute, and because I just wanted to kind of be a part of it. I'm thinking, oh, the sound bath, I should really start going to flute. It's a native instrument to me. And I would always want to play something. And then I'd probably say about a month and a half after my grandmother first came, and she'd come because we were doing weekly meditations. But she showed up the third time with a friend of mine who had passed away about 3 years before, 4 years before. And he was a beautiful shaman. He went on a trip, and the military and that their group was picnicking somewhere, and the military thought they were somebody else and opened fire on him. Now, before he had left, he gave me one of his totems and said, "When I come back, we're supposed to work together." And I was so excited, and because I was at the time I was doing live painting to music and everything, but I was always tracks. To have a shaman playing around me while I was painting, it was going to be very cool, right? He never came back. And now he's sitting next to grandma in my meditation, handing me one of his instruments. And it clicked to me. I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be part of this sound world. And then I also was in very much the question. I just don't want to be, I want it to last more than the hour. So I dove into it as to figure why was it, how do you get that feeling to last? And it turns out for the past, 20 years, the Mayo Clinic, John Hopkins, the Sound Institute in Austria, they've all been doing deep dive studies on sound and its effect on the body. And you have incredible, like, it's probably one of the most explosive medical uh, uh, professions out there right now. We're discovering so much about, first of all, our you know, physiology, who we are as human beings, our species, and pretty much the existence of the entire universe is all sound. Everything is a frequency. You take an atom, you open it up, in the books, there'll be two balls there, two illustrated, orbs. You do that in real life, you open that up, there'll be two vibrating elements there. They're just frequencies. At our very rock bottom core, we are frequency. And knowing that when you actually can tune your frequency, tune yourself back to your original frequency without everything from clothes to music to family to emotions to your work, you drive in, drive back from work, all the 5G and everything else, we are just part of nature. And being in far and in tune with nature and that frequency has us centered. You feel a lot better, walking through a forest than you do walking through downtown Manhattan. And I've worked there. and it's a great place to work. I love it. And the people there are awesome. It's wonderful. But give me, an hour in the forest will give me a lot more healing time with myself, my mind, and, everything from parasympathetic nervous system to, your vagus nerve to your overall mentality. Um, all of that is frequency that sound therapy via sound baths done correctly and targeting various parts of whether it be your chakras, whether it be your nervous systems and whatnot with native instruments is incredibly powerful. That's incredibly, and so now I had my why. I went and found, and I'm just finishing up uh, a mastery class in the sound science with the Shift Network, and I'm incredibly excited for this new, actually, I want to say remembered field that exists. There's only one thing in the world that obliterates cancers, tumors. It's sound.
Mm.
And so that alone should have us going, okay, it can do that when nothing else can do that. Not even, surgeries can cut it out, but there's always still something, possibly left. But sound obliterating and actually having those cells go away or be turned back into human cells, that's something to note. Personally, I think sound therapy, will be, re-enter the medical field within the next 7 to 10 years.
So now you're offering sound therapy, sound baths to groups and individuals. Um, so much of that world is the crystal bowls and the gongs, but it sounds like you have an interest in other instruments. Can you take us through a few things that have really kind of captured your attention and how you've spent some time with those?
Yeah. So I think my favorite thing playing right now is the flute, um, the native flute, because there's a soulfulness about it for myself, and there's different types. There's a Mayan flute, there's a native wooden flute. The Mayan flute is made primarily out of clay, but the various instruments, I've taught myself to play all of these. Once I started, I just like, well, I don't know who to find. I don't know who plays these things. So, you know, and this is where it's like, oh, now we have YouTube, and so I've done a lot of, great searching on YouTube and how to play or how people do play these things. And finding a good instrument is great. A lot of the a lot of the sound bath practitioners are great. Now, I'll say this, any kind of work you do, for self healing, for self rejuvenation, and for self care, I think is great. And um, you know, be conscious about how you what is your intention going in. If it's just to feel good, a lot of it, and unfortunately, we live in a very image oriented society. So a lot of people are very image like, oh, well, that's the best looking person out there, and and they look like an ex, model, and I should go and do their sound baths. And hey, great, I think that's wonderful. And this is a very having someone that knows the science behind it and is actually generating frequencies from a science level. It looks the same, it sounds the same, but it's very different because what the science will be doing is working with you several weeks afterwards, versus stuff that, are people doing just a concert or a performance. Your body's going to go, oh, yeah, this is sound. Everything, your subconscious is going to go, okay, we're not there anymore. Now, time to keep doing what we're doing in life. Once your subconscious knows this is scientific sounds, then it keeps playing with it. It keeps going with it. It keeps, attuning to those frequencies. I think, the various instruments that I play and that I've discovered along the way, from the sensula, which is a Japanese like thumb piano thing, to the hand pan, the didgeridoo, all these are not only beautiful and fun to play, but then to understand the medical and the therapeutic benefits that they could be for people is fantastic. So Tibetan bowls, just we start there. You have migrated from the monks in Tibet, right? Well, turns out playing a Tibetan bowl for no less than 6 minutes, ups your oxygen level, ups your blood oxygen level over 12%. Why is that important? Because any healing in the body requires blood oxygen level. Depending on how high your blood oxygen level is, depends on how quickly you're going to heal, or if you're going to heal at all. To increase the blood availability, oxygen 12%, that's a big deal. That's almost like, that's just as good, if not better, than being in an oxygen chamber. And this is just the Tibetan bowls. And so you have things like the didgeridoo, which is probably the oldest instrument in the world, the gongs, the shaman drums, and then the native flutes. Those instruments with the bowls, are the primary instruments. And then you have things like a monochord, which is more of like a still harp, or a hand pan, which is actually hits frequencies that are really attuned to just relaxing this, the parasympathetic nervous system. It kind of just has your frequencies in your body go, ah, because it doesn't have to, those molecules, your frequency that's going on in your body doesn't have to calculate anything. It actually just gets to relax and be what it naturally is, and that's part of nature.
Mm. Is there a connection for you between your fine art, your visual art expression, that part of your life, and the sound therapy part of your life? Do those overlap in your mind, or you kind of keep those separate? How does that work for you?
I think, it's funny because somebody, it was just asked recently, how do, what is it like, how do you get into your groove with your creative process? And when they asked me that, I realized it's the same whether I'm making fine art or whether I'm making music. And it really is quieting my own mind. And we don't do that a lot as a society. We're actually conditioned and trained to just be, especially with social media and everything, it's like conditioned to always be on, to always be calculating something, to figuring out your next move, and we don't tell kids, not every second, but kids hear it as every second. And so we're adults, and now we're calculating every next second. Well, when I allow my mind just some quiet, some stillness, all of a sudden imagination comes to life and creativity comes to life. And same with my sound. The thread there is quiet and silence, and being still. And then all of a sudden music happens and frequency happens. And, I found myself, really diving into rhythms and uh, melodies that sound beautiful and were supportive of therapeutic purposes for the individuals and the people that I'm playing with. So I hope that, people look at my fine art and say he's giving something of himself, because really that is my intention, to share something that I couldn't put into words. You know, Music is the same thing, and sharing something I can't put into words. And those that really connect with it are they don't have words either, but they're having a conversation with one or the other.
Mhm. Beautiful, beautiful. Gene, talk to me about where people can check out your art if they want to see your art locally in Southern California or just online. Where should they head?
Well, I have a hub of a website, and it's artistgene.com. And from there you can go to my artist website, which has my galleries and whatnot, which is Art of Gene. You can also go to my sound work now on heal.me. And you can also go to my comic book company there as well. It's all there at artistgene.com, and a couple other great links there of different creative stuff I'm working on as well.
Beautiful. Artistgene.com. So if you're interested in checking out Gene's artwork, his fine art, his comic book company, check that out. If you want to have Gene lead you in a sound healing experience, whether it's for group or individuals, that would be in Southern California. But hey, you're willing to fly anywhere in the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're gearing up right now. Hopefully next year we'll be traveling within the states here to for some sessions and therapy dates. So excited about that.
Great. And if you want to check out Gene on Instagram, it's Artist Gene on Instagram. So we'll put all of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening on your phone, you can just swipe up now. Or if you're on the website, you can, of course, just see his links below the article. So Gene, thank you so much. One last question. If somebody is just starting out, we've talked a lot about creativity and that spans every aspect of life, right? That's not just visual arts, but that's healers, coaches, speakers, authors, even business people. And they have a dream, they have a desire inside of them, but they're trying to figure out, like, I don't know, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm fearful, I've got anxiety, like, I don't know if I pursue it. There's all that negative stuff in their head, right? What encouragement would you give them today?
I'd tell them we are here for a very short time. And we live in a society where it says, you should work really hard. And I'm all for that. I think, my family does work, taught me to work really hard. And I can work really hard making somebody else's dreams come true, or I can really work really hard making my dreams come true. So don't be afraid to go after it, and a big part of it, know that a big part of it's going to come as failure, because this is your dream. Nobody's ever created your dream before. It's an original thing, and it's part of that definition of creativity. It's your imagination coming to life. So that it's yours, that it is coming from you. It's worth the failures. It's worth the hurdles and whatnot. And if it, have it live for you, and if you have it live for you enough, and you'll have enough failure, and you'll have enough uh successes. um that first step will always be worth it.
Beautiful. Artistgene.com. Gene, thank you so much for taking some time to hang with us today and connecting, sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.